This is the DJI FPV drone. We're gonna go test it. Hey, if you don't know me, my name's Jake and I create content here on YouTube to help solo creators on the go. Today we're talking about the DJI Digital FPV drone. If you haven't seen, DJI released a new drone, but it's very different from other drones that DJI's released. This is the DJI FPV drone, and what this does is very similar to other FPV drones and gives you a full-on acrobatic mode, but it also starts with you in a more stabilized mode that's more like DJI's other GPS drones. This is very different from anything else, but it can be flown similarly. So if you're familiar with DJI's GPS drones, the Mavic series or anything like that, you'll be able to fly this in the regular mode and the sport mode fairly easily. It even has some obstacle avoidance, so if you get too close to something, it'll kind of slow you down and give you a little more chance to react when you're in the normal mode. But when you go into sport mode, that obstacle avoidance is disabled. And I think I need to say this right off the bat, that if you are already an FPV pilot, you've built some of your own drones, that's what I do. This is my big heavy lift FPV drone, which carries a Blackmagic or red Komodo on it. This is not the drone for you. This is really for people who want to transition from flying GPS drones into getting more of that sort of cinematic FPV. I wouldn't even say, I mean, you can fly acrobatic stuff with this, but it's a little too heavy in my opinion to really do acrobatics well. It comes in at about 800 grams. And it's not to say that you can't, it's just, it is a little heavy. It has a little harder time recovering out of those loops or rolls or flips. So when I set out to make a video about this drone, I was really struggling with trying to figure out who this drone is for and what kind of is its strength or what the best things about it are. And I've really come to the conclusion the best thing about this drone is the fact that you can fly with confidence to places like that and not worry about the fact that you lose control link or you lose video or anything like that. You have a panic button that you can pause it, stop it. It'll immediately stop, and I mean immediately stop. It's so fast how it stops and hovers, and it goes into a normal mode, and then you fly it just like a regular GPS drone to get back to you. Or you tap that pause button again, and the drone will automatically ascend to whatever altitude you have set in the settings and come back to you in a safe way. The other thing that's nice about this is because it uses DJI's OcuSync 3.0, or I think that's what they're calling it. It does give you really good, really strong image transmission, even at a great distance, much further than you can fly with a spotter who's maintaining your visual line of sight with this drone. Originally, when I was first looking at this, I thought this is, you know, a great drone for people who do like to fly longer distances, kind of like surf mountain ridges down. But even at that, it is limited. DJI does have their geo-locking system on there, so you cannot fly in places that you're not supposed to fly, that you're not authorized to. And you can't go further or higher than 1,654 feet or 400 meters, no matter what, because it's software locked at that height or firmware locked at that height. You can go a great distance away, but in the case of like here where you're gonna fly, I mean, I could go up to the top of that glacier there, and that's pretty much 1,600 feet already. And then there's miles more of that go behind that. So it does kind of limit you on what you can do. But if you want to get into cinematic FPV and you want to get some of those smooth, fluid, flying through shots, this actually isn't terrible at that. It does a decent job. In that regard, though, we probably need to talk about the video specs. So on the video specs, it has a 4K 60 frames per second camera when you're using it in high quality mode, which is the feed to the goggles, as opposed to low latency mode. If you switch to low latency mode, then you only get 1080p 60. You can't get the 4K 60 in the internal recording. I'm sure that has something to do with the amount of processing power available on the drone to process that image. But if you use it in high quality mode, the image to the goggles is really nice because you're getting a dumbed down 4K feed because you're using the same camera that's recording a 4K 60 image that's sent to your goggles at 1080 or 720 at 120 frames a second or 60 frames a second. The one limit of the camera is, because it's built in and it's very similar to the Osmo Action, is a pretty limited dynamic range. You can record with it in D-Cine-like, which gives you a little bit more flexibility, but it's a little harder to fly because it's not a contrast image. It's harder to tell where or how close you are to things without the contrast. So I fly it in normal and then just kind of mess with it in post. Another thing you are going to want for this to get the most out of it is good ND filters. Freewell makes a set that's really good. They pop right on there. They stay on really well, and they will give you the ultimate control to where you get smooth motion blur and it doesn't end up being kind of a jittery or more ray effect in the image. Overall, the camera's okay for stuff like here on YouTube, for social media stuff, for anything higher, any higher production value, things like that, I would be using a different FPV drone with a different camera attached, whether it's my big heavy lift Cinelift drone or if it was just a regular 5-inch with a GoPro Hero 8 or Hero 9 on it to capture, because the GoPro has just a little bit better image quality. Overall, this controller is actually really nice if you do some travel because it's small and compact and kind of breaks down nicely. It's very similar to another controller on the market that's been out for a year or so that I have for my other FPV drones, the Tango 2, which is great. But, you know, feels nice, works okay. The gimbals aren't as big as I like, but they're not bad, they work. And I do like the fact that it all kind of just breaks down and folds in and has a pretty decent battery life as far as flying time goes. And, you know, once you figure out where the controls are on everything, it's nice. You can start and stop recording, start and stop your cruise control. Here you have your panic button, your pause button, where the drone will pause and hover in place, and then you can switch it back to normal mode. Which, by the way, when you come in for landing, I've tried to land in manual mode. It has not gone well. It's probably because I'm landing in very uneven ground and stuff like that. If you're coming in for a landing, if you're flying in manual mode, what I recommend is come in close to where you are, hit the pause button so the drone stabilizes, or switch back into normal mode so that you get that extra stability and the landing mode, because that seems to be the way it's easiest to land the drone without like flipping over when you land or landing a little crooked or a little weird, especially if you're landing in weird places that are uneven like this is. So this is not a deep dive review. This is more of my initial first impressions and what I think of this drone overall. The deep dive, the in-depth review will be coming here soon as I can get a little more time with this drone. But overall, coming from GPS drones, if you're wanting to transition into the cinematic sort of flowy FPV style drones, then this is not a bad drone to start with. I really didn't like it. I really didn't want to like it as much as I have really enjoyed flying this thing. If you're wanting to get into really hardcore acrobatics or really like the freestyle type stuff, then I would recommend you go a different direction. You definitely would want to get something you build yourself because it's going to be much more durable. This is not that durable. If you crash or if you plan on doing more risky stuff, I would highly recommend you get DJI Care for it because you're going to use it. But overall, for flying cinematic, longish range type stuff, this is really great. The goggles are amazing. The visual feed to the goggles is fantastic and super solid. I really hope that DJI comes out with an Air Unit version 2 so I can put it in my other FPV drones that will link up with the same sort of quality to the goggles. The remote control is great. I like it. It's really usable. It's easy to hold. Even for pinching, stuff like this, it's not bad at all. And the transition going from normal sport mode to manual mode or back is really not that hard. Even though I took the spring out of my gimbal so that I could fly it in normal mode or in manual mode, it's pretty easy to find that kind of sweet spot when you take off and let it hover and be able to put your goggles on, and then when you come back, hit the pause button so that it goes back into normal mode or flip it back into normal mode and then fly it just like a regular GPS drone. The battery life on this is pretty impressive for a FPV drone. My normal FPV drones, I get maybe 5.5 minutes, 6 minutes maybe of kind of gentle cruising, whereas this, I can definitely push into the 10-minute range depending on how fast I'm flying. If you start doing the heavier, the more acrobatic stuff where you're having to use a lot more power, then you're gonna go down to 6, maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes at the most. But it does do well in the battery life department. It really goes for a long time, and that actually is really kind of nice because I only had one battery to test and no way to recharge it while I was out there. And it was able to fly for everything you saw was flown on one battery on one charge, which is really nice for a change, not to have to take 4 or 5 batteries with me. So if you're wanting to jump into this, I would recommend you be cautious and be careful. And anytime anybody asks me about starting FPV, I always recommend the same thing. Start with a simulator, work on the simulator, and then if you're going to jump into this, then start with it in normal mode and get used to it, kind of feeling in normal mode, switch to sport mode, get a feeling of the pushing it a little faster. And when you switch to the manual mode, which you have to do in the goggles and in the firmware, or not in the firmware, but through the goggles, you have to go and disable a couple of things, and I'll show you how to do that on a future video. Be careful and be out in an open area where you have lots of space, and just take your time to really learn and really feel it and get your muscle memory built up so that you have less chance of crashing this. Because this does not handle crashes nearly as well as a home-built FPV quad. It's breakable. But that being said, like, I did have a landing where I flipped over and the drone was fine and the props got scuffed up and stuff like that, but it's okay. I haven't had any hard crashes or anything like that because I have been careful with it. The nice thing is that DJI actually made a simulator that you use with your phone, and you plug your phone into this OTG cable that they give you with the goggles, and then whatever cable goes from here to your phone. And then you can sit with the goggles on and with the controller. Once you link them all up and activate everything, you can sit there and fly just like you would in the real world, just using the goggles and the controller, and get a lot of time and experience based on what this drone would feel like in the real world. I would highly recommend you do that for 10 hours at least, maybe a little more, until you start feeling comfortable before you start trying to fly in the manual mode, so that you don't destroy this drone really early on. Even with the limitations of the camera as far as the dynamic range and stuff like that, the footage out of it is really nice. It's not as smooth or as stable as my GoPro with Real Steady on my regular 5-inch quad, but it is certainly good enough to capture some of those really fast motion, fluid, FPV style cinematic shots. I wouldn't use this for a lot of freestyle or bando bashing or anything like that, just because it's a little heavier and it doesn't quite fly as well as a 5-inch, but that's me. And that's coming from some very high performance FPV quads. I will be going deeper into all of this and do a kind of setup tutorial on how to use this and how to transition from flying regular GPS drones to this style of drone. So if there's something specific you want me to cover in that video, let me know in the comments below. If you want to see other drones that I use on a daily basis here in Alaska, then you can click or tap right there, put together a short playlist. That will also include the deep dive review of this drone and the setup and tutorial on how to use it. Click or tap there. I'll see you in one of those videos. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below, or join my live stream Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.